So every now and then my mind can lapse into carelessness and complacency about attachment. Like, what's the big deal? Attachment? The really big, dangerous affliction is anger. And we can see that clearly because, Shantideva devoted a whole chapter to that affliction. And Venerable Children unpacked 134 verses in that chapter over almost 6 months. There's the book Working with Anger, written by Venerable Children, Healing Anger by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There's a huge section of that in the Lam Rim commentaries. What's the big deal? Attachment. It kind of feels nice, Well, and Geshe Yeshe has recently been unpacking Illumination of the Intent. And there again we see the tremendous effects of anger. One moment. However, in chapter 8 of Shantideva, there's a number of verses that have really gotten my attention. And these two in particular help me see how devastating attachment can be and how it's the fuel for the 8 worldly concerns. So verses 78 and 79 really got my attention this time. 78 says, some lustful people even cut their bodies, others impale themselves on the points of sticks, some stab themselves with daggers, and others burn themselves. Such things as these are quite apparent. Verse 79, due to the torment involved in collecting it, protecting, and finally losing it, I should realize wealth to be fraught with infinite problems. Those who are distracted by their attachment to it have no opportunity to gain freedom from the misery of conditioned existence. All these behaviors come from attachment. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche has written a book titled How to Practice the Dharma, Teachings on the 8 Worldly Dharmas. And this is a quote from that book. Attachment to the happiness of this life is the cause of all of our problems. Attachment is the cause of every individual person's problems, every family's problem, every country's problems. It's the cause of global problems. The basic problems facing young people, teenagers, middle-aged people, elderly people, every problem we can think of can be traced to this root attachment to the happiness of this life. This sentence I'm going to put on my table. If we could read our own life story and remember all the pain we've gone through so many times in this life alone, it would be like a commentary on the shortcomings of desire, our attachment to sense pleasure. And I love this quote because it captures what we've heard from Venerable Children. Lama Zopa Rinpoche writes, I used to spend a lot of time teaching on the evil thought of the 8 worldly dharmas. During many of the early Kopan courses, I'd spend weeks talking about it. Talking about the 8 worldly dharmas was my main hobby in those early courses. How fortunate we are that Venerable Children heard those teachings. And so she has been bestowing this on us as well. So attachment fuels the 8 worldly concerns. So the 8 worldly concerns, craving money and possessions, being really upset and averse to losing those, craving reputation and hating to have a bad one, craving praise and approval, doing whatever we can to get it, having total aversion to having disapproval, and craving sense pleasures and having aversion when they're not there. So all of this is this fueled by attachment. So I'm going to share a true story right now that really takes me back to how devastating this mental state is. I'm going to not say names, I won't say locations, I'll give some hints. But it is a true story that shook me very deeply to my core. So a few years ago when my mom was still alive, I was going there to help my sister, and I went to the hospital a lot, let me tell you, with both my parents, a lot. I rode in the ambulance a lot to emergency. Every time I was there was Dr. So-and-so. And he seemed to be very, very committed. My sister worked in the medical clinic at the time, and he was very nice to her. He was very respectful to her, but he wasn't respectful to everyone. So I heard some of the local gossip. When you live in a town, you get the local gossip. But she said he was an extremely popular doctor with men and women. Very popular because they liked how he was caring for them. So at one point, it was another trip to the hospital. And I can't remember now, but there was something going on with my mom. And we got into the emergency department, and it was determined that my mom needed an IV to get hydrated. So all these nurses in the emergency department are trying to poke my mom, getting this into her hand, and they couldn't do it. She has those kind of roly veins, and she had a small little hand. And every time they tried, and they got 3 or 4 different nurses, it was a gong show. She was crying out in pain. It was like, can't you do this? This is an emergency department. And then they said, call for Dr. So-and-so. So he came running, and I'd never seen him in person. Well, I had seen him, but I'd never seen him, up close. And I couldn't believe how kind he was to my mom, and he took her hand. He said, don't worry, we're going to do this right now. We're going to do it right. He slips it into her hand. No problem. Then he picks her up and takes her to the bed where she would spend the night. And my mom thought it was Prince Charming. She was like, and she wanted to kiss him. I think she did give a little kiss on the cheek. And he was just smiling. He said, you need to stay here for tonight, Mavis. We got to keep an eye on you, and you'll be just fine, and I'll check on you in the morning. I was just blown away at his care. The next day, sure enough, he came first thing. He came and checked on her. He just, had some tests done. And he said, you know what, Mavis, I'm going to let you go home now. And then she did kiss him. So again, he was so kind to her, so caring, so patient. About 7 years after that, I learned from my sister that he had moved to a larger town and that he had been recommended as Doctor of the Week. And so he wrote this post at the time. Although I work in a variety of medical specializations, my biggest passion is for rural maternal care, sustaining maternity care programs and advocating so that mothers can deliver their babies safely closer to home. It's a journey, an amazing journey for the patient from the start of her pregnancy to receiving the new bundle of joy. Bringing her joy is my joy. This man was committed to caring for other people. 2 years ago, in a phone call from my sister, she said, oh, by the way, we just heard that Dr. So-and-so committed suicide. I said, what? She said, yeah. I said, what's going on? She said, no one's saying anything. And then she ended the call with, by the way, his best friend committed suicide 2 days earlier. And I said, Cheryl, there's something going on here. She said, yeah, no one's saying anything. No one did say anything for quite some time. So to make this story a little bit shorter, here's what happened. Apparently all the money he was making, all the prestige, all the adoration, he had thousands of patients. It wasn't enough. So he and his younger friend, his best friend, came up with this scheme where Dr. So-and-so was starting to write prescriptions for opioids, and they were selling it on the street. They thought they had a foolproof plan, so they're both quite arrogant in the thought that they would never get caught, because Dr. So-and-so thought it was an ironclad, foolproof plan that they would never be found out. They were found out. Attachment. So, the questions just come, like, how could you do this? How could you diverge from the Hippocratic oath that you took when you became a doctor? How could you diverge from that? How could you diverge from caring for others and then feed people on the street with stuff that's going to kill them? How could you do this to your family? They both left children behind. They both had a wife, extended family. The doctor had thousands of patients, most of them adoring patients. The money that he had, which was a lot, rural doctors in Canada, I don't know how it is here, Rural doctors make a lot of money. And he worked a lot. He was on all kinds of committees. And it was not enough. And so he diverged from everything that he was true to earlier in his life for decades and engaged in this plan that brought his own demise in such a tragic way. He couldn't stand the idea, obviously neither of them could stand the thought that they would be exposed publicly. He would no longer be a doctor. For sure jail time, maybe for life. Disapproval, disrespect, criticism, disappointment, failure. They couldn't bear it. How tragic that they couldn't. So in sharing this story, I'm not trying to criticize either of them. It's just, and if any of their family members ever bump into this talk, I wouldn't want them to think I'm criticizing these men. It's actually more a case of, wow, how tragic, and what a lesson for all of us. But also to use this story as a, for me, I see it as a very impactful story that shows me in my earlier life where I have diverged profoundly from things that I've held as true or important or ethical. So may we all do that, because we have these circumstances, maybe if you haven't done it in this life, in past lives. And to see the power of attachment is not something we can blow off. Oh, so I'm attached to peaches. That's not it. That's not it at all. So Lama Zopa writes, the evil thought, so let's not take that lightly, the evil thought of the 8 worldly dharmas, the desire clinging to this life, is what interferes with our practice of listening to teachings, reflecting on their meaning, and meditating on the path they reveal. This evil thought is what makes our Dharma practice so ineffectual. So let's be vigilant in setting our motivations throughout the day. We have to look out for these 8 worldly thoughts, because we have been trained successfully, repeatedly in previous lives, in this life, in using those to get happiness, and it actually brings tremendous suffering.